Welcome to the archive, Jack Holloway. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's good to be here.
Good. It's good to have you here. We're going to talk about today Black Sabbath, easily one of the most iconic, recognizable bands within rock and roll and heavy metal. You definitely have not listened to rock or metal without hearing their names. Interestingly enough, although back in the 70s, for people who might not know the history too much about it, they initially started out as a band called Earth, and they were like this bluesy rock jam band. Uh, and then they had a reformation. They found out someone else had that name, and they decided they were going to, under some circumstances, decided they were going to finally write their own content. And what did they do? They decided to write content about the horror movies that Tony Iommi was watching, and at the time were considered pretty scary. Nowadays, Black Sabbath is probably a movie that a lot of people would look at and see as comical. But they also had a very theosophical legacy as well, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, yeah, right on. And but still with the still bluesy and still with the emphasis on earth. Um, Tony Iommi also was in a an earlier band called Mythology, and Black Sabbath will kind of come to represent that too. It's a kind of musical mythology. Um, so yeah, I'm excited to always excited to talk Sabbath.
Yeah. So, what got you first off started on wanting to even write a book on this subject?
Well, so I actually discovered Black Sabbath in seminary. Um, it's I I growing up, I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music. I was only allowed to listen to Christian music, music that explicitly worshiped Jesus or reflected biblical values. Um, Now, I obviously, didn't just listen to the bands that I was allowed to listen to, but because those were the restrictions, that put, quite a net over what I was able to listen to or what I had access to. So it wasn't until uh, I was in seminary that I really started to go back to the source of a lot of the music that I was listening to. I was listening to metal when I was a kid, but I was listening to Christian metal. And then I discovered other metal bands that weren't Christian. But it wasn't until seminary that I started listening to Black Sabbath. And it was because of War Pigs. I had heard it in the show Fargo. There's in season 2 of Fargo, they play War Pigs at one point, and I remember just thinking, like, what the hell is this? This is the greatest song I've ever heard in my life. And so I listened to War Pigs, and um, then when I was listening to War Pigs, it struck me not just how apocalyptic it was, but how biblical it was, and how God is casting or judgment on the those who make war, the politicians and the generals who make war, and Satan is there alongside God serving justice. So that image really drew me in and made me think, like, what is this band saying with their music, and how does it compare contrast with the apocalyptic literature that I was studying in seminary from the Bible and from the inter what's called the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There was a lot of apocalyptic literature that was being written and that I was studying. Um, so yeah, that's what got me into it. And then there was just one day where I was kind of nerding out about that to a friend of mine who is a pastor, and I didn't realize, but he also turned out to be series editor for this book series on popular music and theology. And that's like after he heard me talk about Black Sabbath like that, he wanted a whole book about it. So he invited me to write the book. And that's how I got into it.
Cool. Cool. So that was a stepping stone, and you also had some encouragement uh in the book department.
Yeah, no. So I really had to overcome quite um, a handicap in that I didn't grow up with the music. You know, I hadn't been, living and breathing Black Sabbath for years and years and years. I came to it as a as a novice. You know, I came to it as somebody who was learning everything for the first time. So, and that's kind of it was cool. Uh, to have that be a part of it because then I got to respond to it in a unique way, which I think is maybe one of the points of the book. One of the things that the book serves is that it's a different take on Black Sabbath. It's not just another book about Black Sabbath. You know, there are so many books about Black Sabbath at this point. So I think that kind of makes it unique, and yeah.
Yeah, that does make it highly unique. It's very interesting for someone to, as a fish out of water, be examining Black Sabbath for the first time through that perspective.
That's also
And
been cool as well to when Sabbath fans read the book and they're looking at it from a perspective they hadn't considered before. And so it's like a resurgence of their love, and it's like a deepening of their love for the band and for the music. And I love that. I love that that can come from me sharing my perspective.
yeah, so how did so where did you start on your dive into this incredible study of the band and its history?
So I limited myself to the first six Ozzy albums because I it was supposed to be a short book, and if I was gonna go through the whole career, it would have just been too long. And also that was the material I wanted to learn the most. Um, and yeah, so I basically just started by going through all the different albums. And like Master of Reality is so profound in its theology. um like a song like Lord of this World or After Forever, you know, there were songs that really stuck out. But I think where I start in the book is with the song Black Sabbath and how it was just kind of a bolt out of the blue in the context. You know that this was it was the perfect song for the time for that when it came out, because we were on the precipice of like a turn from one era to another, the 60s to the 70s. And the 60s, you know, very idealistic, very much about love and peace and celebrating our unity as humanity. You know, you have flower power. And the 70s, things get a lot darker, and people start getting a lot more jaded and critical. You know, they've witnessed Martin Luther King, his assassination. They've witnessed all these people that have, you know, come in the name of love and just be knocked down with like such violence. And so the song Black Sabbath, I felt, really gave voice to a disappointment about those hopes and dreams that people had been feeding throughout the 60s. And you know, like pronouncing a Dina Weinstein, who wrote this sociology book about heavy metal, said that uh, the the difference in the eras is that like love um, was followed up by its binary opposite, which is evil. So it's like and Black Sabbath really kind of articulated that, the word evil, and that's what they said that they were trying to do, is that they felt Flower Power was telling one side of the story and they wanted to tell the other half, and that's where that where their motivation came from.
I know that a lot of people don't really historically see uh, the violence also that was going on in 1960s, or from your study of it, were they accurately or well portraying the dark side of things, or was it, do you think, adding fuel to the fire or igniting something that may have not even been beneficial?
I mean, I think there's a there was a an old review of Black Sabbath that said, I can't remember where it was published, but it was in a newspaper. It said, Nobody but the public loves Black Sabbath," and it was because all of the reviews in magazines and uh, in the music journals were very poor. I mean, they just hated this music that they were making, and partially because it was downer music. It was so negative and so dreary and bleak. But on the flip side, like the response that people had to the music and people's enthusiasm for the music was so strong that it was undeniable. And I think, I think that only happens when you do actually have the song for the moment, or the music for the moment. And I think they really did. I think people, especially because of the Manson murders and because of the killing at Altamont, the Rolling Stones concert, and because of all the assassinations. I mean, you're seeing a lot of very public violence and a lot of very public negativity. And I think you have to process that in some way. You have to have some kind of digestion of those facts. And I think Black Sabbath's music is such perfect music for digesting the evil in the world. And I love using that word too, like digesting, because it's not a word I use in the book, but I think it captures so perfectly like what is happening when you're listening to the music, because it's like you are getting out a lot of aggression, you're getting out a lot of that negativity because it's like kind of consuming you. And especially when they were playing it live and they were so loud, and the the audio waves were like washing through people. They said that what they would finish playing the song Black Sabbath and nobody would clap, they would just be dumbfounded, like and that I think is very telling about what purpose the music is serving.
And so this is another question that comes to mind, is that um, so during the 60s, there's a huge surge within Eastern philosophy, like Hinduism was made a huge hit here in America because of the Beatles. Um, was this negativity? I mean, what was the theosophical impact with this negative music coming out?
Oh man, I don't know how well I can speak to that question per se, um, because Black Sabbath doesn't really touch on that as much. What's actually interesting is the extent to which, despite articulating so much negativity, they still managed to be a very positive band. Like when Ozzy sings "Love is showing me the way," and I forget even what song that's on. I think it's Spiral Architect. Um, and There's another song. I think it's after. No, no, no. It's not after forever. Man, I need to like. I'm gonna have to reread the book just to get all the the facts like a little more ready. I'm like I'm rusty. It's been a couple years since it came out almost. But yeah, there's all these songs where love is precisely the point. And even in War Pigs, where you have this judgment, like what's the judgment is on those who are violent. So it's not a glorification of violence or even an exploitation of people's preoccupation with violence. It's Lester Bangs from Rolling Stones. He called it moralism. He called Black Sabbath moralists. I think it's moralism. I think it is a kind of it is a denial of re- that, that all things are relative. That that it's a denial of relativism. Yeah, it's like it's it's saying no, there is good and evil. It's just that evil rules. And what we need is an end to the reign of evil and a dawn of justice and love. And I think that is what is so compelling about Black Sabbath is like even though they're suspicious of flower power and they don't believe in the optimism of the 60s, they still have an underlying emphasis on love that is shot through their albums.
But like at that time, I mean, there were things leading up to it. Like what was in like was this stuff that was prevalent even before Sabbath, like when Tony Iommi was in Mythology, were these things that were or these concepts being explored at that time? Or is this kind of like a whole new wave of like, nope, we're gonna start talking about this, we're gonna talk about that, um, we're gonna make it dark and heavy, or were these things that these guys were talking about beforehand?
It was definitely starting to get into the ether. I think it would be an overstatement to say that Black Sabbath like pioneered the emphasis on like the occult and the emphasis on the darker elements of existence. You start to see that even with like the Stooges. And I mean, there were other bands. Coven was preceded Black Sabbath in that respect. And in fact, Black Sabbath uh, was a kind of creation of um, I mean, they even said that like the inverted cross in the gatefold of the original Black Sabbath album was not an intention of the band. Like the producers put that in there, and they were as surprised as anybody to see it. And it brought them a following of Satanists and other occult groups, which they like lost pretty soon because they revealed themselves to be insufficiently occult. I mean, they all wore right side up crosses around their necks to protect them from evil spirits because they were all having the same nightmares. So um yeah, there was an extent to which they were the kind of culmination of some things that were bubbling. Um, but yeah, they weren't so much the first or the only ones to be doing that.
Yeah. Well, we all know that the upside down cross is really St. Peter's cross because he was crucified upside down.
Yeah, no, we love that. We love to um, you know, pull the actually you're serving Jesus anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so did you I mean even like through the journey of doing this book, did you remain in seminary? Did you remain with that? with that?
Yeah, so I wrote the book after seminary. I graduated from seminary in 2018. Um, and yeah, I'm still in ministry. Uh I'm an elder at a church. I preach. I'm actually on Monday putting on a a kind of church service called Despair Sanctuary. Um, it's it's a series where people are invited to bring their negative emotions, and we play metal music. At the first two, we played drone metal, and at this next one, we're playing black metal. And the purpose is to provide space for people to come bring their negative emotions and kind of again digest them through metal music. So it's still like very much a part of what I do is like kind of this marriage of ministry and metal. It's just not it's not explicitly Christian. It's it's not to convert people, it's not to make Christians of people, it's more to just the word ministry means service. So it's a service. I think of it more as a public service. But yeah, that's what my seminary training has kind of been about.
Yeah. And did Sabbath studying this make that contribution? It created a different challenge and perspective, or was this something already there?
Oh yeah, I mean it was not only not only listening to Black Sabbath and reflecting on just what I was saying about like what the music, what purpose the music was serving for people, but it was also, I mean, right, in writing the book and in listening to the music with that religious dimension, uh I was finding that I was going to the music for that purpose. I was going to the music to process my own negative emotions, and I wanted to be able to pursue that more and see uh how far you could go with that and how far you could invite people into that too. So it was absolutely through like writing the book and reflecting on the way that Black Sabbath was kind of functioning in my own life that I thought of Despair Sanctuary.
Ah, that's cool, man. Sounds like my kind of church.
Right.
Right, exactly. Um, so going through the different albums, I don't know to the degree of what you can recall off the top of your head. What were the things for you, like not just like listening to just the song, like picking out certain songs, like War Pigs as an example? What were things at that time that politically stood out to you going through the original or the first six Ozzy albums?
Mm. Well, one thing that really stuck out to me was the working class perspective, and uh, the song "Killing Yourself to Live" is such a great one because Ozzy tells a story in his autobiography about working in a car horn factory, and he has to shout at one of his coworkers for in order for his coworker to hear him because the guy has been working there so long that he's lost his hearing. And that's like a very uh, concrete example of what it means to kill yourself to live. Like to make a living is what we call like having a job, and having a job that like sacrifices your health and well-being in order to earn money to make a living is killing yourself to live. um so that, and the fact that um Ozzy and Tony came from working class backgrounds. I mean, they're all working class to a certain extent. More some more so than others. But and then also just the fact that they kind of as a as band members come from a very poor background. And Ozzy talks about seeing his mother cry because they couldn't pay the bills. They didn't have enough money to pay the bills. So like that really shapes your perspective on life and the world. And it's not a very, like, Black Sabbath's lyrics don't convey a very like sophisticated um analysis of society. These are not like treatises. That's it. And I wouldn't even go so far as to say that they're explicitly like Marxist or anything, but they are anti-establishment, and they do kind of fuel anti-establishment fervor. And so in that sense, I think they are revolutionary. And that is kind of what was interesting to me, is like, in what sense is this music kind of like fueling revolution? And one good example is Children of the Grave, um, which again talks about fighting and marching for love. And um, so like it's like actually encouraging people to pursue revolution and not to accept the way that things are and work with things as they are, but to explicitly reject them, which I found very inspiring in my own read of it and in my own listening experience. And actually, I participated in a Black Lives Matter protest. It was a bike protest uh, called a Justice Ride, and alongside me at one point, someone is playing on a Bluetooth speaker "War Pigs" by Black Sabbath. So like in my own life, in my own context, like Black Sabbath has been revolutionary music. So that was informing my writing as well.
Yeah. So very anti-establishment. Were there other things politically that jumped out at you beyond just this blue collar, pro working class, anti-establishment uh, context?
Not so much. I mean, obviously the anti-war stuff comes through with War Pigs and Electric Funeral. The Electric Funeral especially, um, is like, when you think about nuclear arms, like that's a great anti-nuclear arms song. This warning about a burning globe of obscene fire. And that song actually as well, in our own time with global warming, where we see these like horrendous wildfires becoming more and more frequent and more widespread, and the destruction that they cause is wider and wider. So yeah, in the time of global warming, the language of burning globe of obscene fire, dying world of radiation, victims of man's frustration, burning globe of obscene fire, like electric funeral pyre. Like those lyrics in an age of global warming, like ring so much truer, I think. And especially in the apocalyptic language in general, like rings truer because we are seeing these like apocalyptic scenes caused by global warming. um so yeah, like things like that. It's like a lot of Black Sabbath isn't like overtly political, but it's political in a kind of truism sense, of like articulating morals and articulating values.
Later, kind of towards when we get a little further down towards the end of the Ozzy era before Dio comes in, were there things shifting in the 60s into the 70s narrative?
Yeah, I mean, the more that their songwriting becomes influenced by intoxicants, the I think definitely if you look at the lyrics of Never Say Die and like that album and um gosh, I can like see the Technical Ecstasy. The lyrical content to me in those two albums is not as deep, and the songs were written faster, uh, like not I mean quickly or more quickly. They they were kind of thrown together, and they were thrown together in like ever more um, questionable states. So I kind of feel like the the kind of deeper meaning of the lyrics kind of wanes at that point. Um, it's not a hard and fast rule. Like I still listen to those albums, um, but like yeah, I think in this the more the breakdown in the bands kind of shows through. Um, it's kind of sad in that way. Um, it comes back, I think, with the Dio period and with Ozzy's solo period. I mean, the song "I Don't Know" off of Blizzard of Oz, I think, is an incredible uh, philosophical song, and some of Ozzy's best work uh, is like so philosophical, so deep. Was from "I Don't Want to Change the World," which again is like already such a philosophical statement. Like I don't want to change the world. Um, uh, Karl Marx said that the philosopher wants to understand the world, but the point is to change it. Uh, and so it's almost Ozzy is almost like he's taking the philosophical stance by saying, "I don't want to change the world." Um, and then, of course, he contradicts that in the song. But these lyrics, I've heard it said, "There's a light up ahead. Lord, I hope and pray I am here to stay. Tell me I'm a sinner, I got news for you. I spoke to God this morning and he don't like you. Don't you try and teach me no original sin. I don't need your pity for the shape I'm in." Like bars. Like
Yeah.
bars. And like so much theology and so much philosophy that he's doing in just a few lines, you know. So I think it doesn't wane. I think in the rest of Black Sabbath's material and in Ozzy's material, it's still very deep. And in metal generally, like metal lyrics are always incredibly deep, and it's one of the reasons I've taken this on as like my field of study. Um, the kind of religious dimensions to metal music, because they're there, you know, and it's very striking.
Yeah. That really is striking. I mean, it's just kind of funny because like Ozzy's the Prince of Darkness. He's been labeled so heavily as in this very wicked image. But here he is writing these songs that are so completely the opposite of that. You know, like Crazy Train, Can We Learn How to Love and Forget How to Hate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And, huh?
precisely.
Yeah. And writing these songs about criticizing people that call him Satanist and puppy killer and always putting him in the wrong or accusing him of being in the wrong, which was really heavy in the 80s. Um, he
Right.
was consistently criticized and attacked. Um, and I think that is just such an interesting thing about writing a song that he doesn't want to change the world and he's not sure his place in it and that bit of uncertainty, but at the same time also backlashing at the people who are just pointing the finger at him so much.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what's also so compelling to me about metal music and metal lyrics is the transvaluation of values, like the transvaluation of taking the material of conservative society, like taking biblical imagery, taking uh, biblical language, and and appropriating it um, for a criticism, like yeah, for a criticism of conservative society, and of conservative figures and of religious figures. So like that one thing that War Pigs does, and one thing that the original Black Sabbath song does, uh, is it throws religious people under the bus, you know. But at the same time, it's using religious language, and at the same time, it's also being truer to the original message than uh, like Richard Nixon and Billy Graham, for example. You look at War Pigs, and it's a criticism of Nixon. And who does Nixon have on his phone? Like Billy Graham. We can go on YouTube and listen to conversations between Richard Nixon and Billy Graham, because Billy Graham was a huge supporter and galvanized the conservative Christians for Nixon and the Nixon administration, and so for the Vietnam War that Nixon was fueling. And so War Pigs, from this satanic band, this evil, horrible, bad influence band, Black Sabbath, is this Christianer than Christian critique of the religious right and the Christian establishment. I mean, it that was the cunning reversal of I can actually out Christian the Christians while still being satanic. I think is probably the most compelling thing about uh, metal culture.
It's the funniest part about it too.
Yeah, yeah,
It's this is just a unique scenario you're not going to find or see anywhere else.
right, right.
Yeah, that's great. Did you want to take a second and talk about anything else you feel like needs to get shown a spotlight on in Sabbaths?
That's a good question. I think um, I, I still don't know it as well, but the later um, like the Martin years and the Gillum years, I think don't get the airtime that they deserve in this respect either. Um, the Eternal Idol is such a great theological album, um, and Cross Purposes. Yeah, I think people need to give the later Sabbath albums another go, if they've been dismissing them too long, and really think too about like what's being said lyrically, um, because those albums are really strong. And but yeah, I mean, mostly I'm just a big fan.
Uh, does still weigh uh, heavily today in terms of an ability to criticize uh, or give some kind of uh, voice um, in the kind of situation some of us are finding ourselves in nowadays in 2024, with a number of wars that have broken out, with our environmental crisis on hand, with the political turmoil.
Yeah, I think I think yes and no, because on the one hand, I think the church as an institution has become so in the public sphere a very I don't want to say meaningless institution, but certainly like uh it's either you have progressive churches that are just going to say what all the progressives are already saying, or you have conservative churches that are just gonna go along with whatever conservatives are doing. Like I I think because of the theological paradigm, like um because our subject is God, the church and like religious institutions more broadly speaking should have a lot more to say, and often do, and it just kind of gets missed. But I think so. Yeah, I mean that's why I mean yes and no. It's like on the one hand, it's like it it's not happening, and on the other hand, it should be happening. But I would invite people into the theological conversations as a way of inviting people into conversations about everything that you just mentioned. And I think maybe that is one of the one of the reasons why metal is a little more multifaceted than a lot of um, punk. Like you said, a lot of punk is very overtly political, and a lot of metal isn't. And I think it's because like metal does deal kind of use a more broadly draws from lots of different kinds of literature, um, and a lot of different religious dimensions as well. And so it is a way of talking about a lot of different things all at once. And I would encourage that, and I think we should stop being embarrassed to talk about God and stop being embarrassed to talk about like good and evil. I think I yeah. I don't want to like, just ideate about that. But and to answer your earlier question, actually, one thing I think that does get overlooked in conversations about Black Sabbath is um, the fact that it depends on the that their success depends on the earlier contributions of African American musicians. Um, just the fact that like the Beatles kind of like opened up an entire market for British rock bands, um, says a lot. So that like Black Sabbath there is no success of Black Sabbath without first the success of the Beatles, and there is no success of the Beatles without Black American music. And the musicians who made that music did not see like at all the success that Black Sabbath has seen, and I think that is an important in our time now when we're thinking about issues of race, and we're seeing like Black Lives Matter protests. I think that is a very important thing to think about. Is like the history of the blues. Like Black Sabbath is part of the history of the blues. Metal music in general is part of the history of the blues, and the history of the blues is Black American history. So I think definitely that is something that gets neglected in when people are talking about metal history and when people are talking about Black Sabbath.
Yeah. With just a couple of people that were just playing like a harmonica or strumming a guitar in place of what used to be a choir of people all singing together and helping develop a rhythm as they worked, turned into a form of music that later became rock and later became metal. It's so unique to see nowadays um, how that success has stemmed out, and it truly is unfortunate that there has been that lack of recognition within its history.
Yeah, I mean, and even the religious dimensions of metal have precursors in blues music and gospel music. I mean, rock and roll in general is really just like a very energetic combination of gospel and blues, you know, and like the, it makes so much sense when you see those things like worked out. And in Black Sabbath, you both have like a very blues emphasis on like the bleaker aspects of life and the darker aspects of life, while also having like these weirdly religious transcendent dimensions to them, like gospel music, you know, and even just the music itself having that like gospel background is like so crazy to think about. And then like you think about Robert Johnson, who pioneered so many blues forms, and
And he
he
was
was
Black Sabbath back in the 30s.
right. So like he was somebody for whom like the like he was a kind of satanic figure, you know, and like Bessie Smith is also uh singing in about the devil, you know. So like even those aspects of Black Sabbath have precursors in blues music. Um so yeah, it's that was really interesting to me to think about. And I have a chapter in the book about like the African American history behind Black Sabbath. And yeah, I think it's important to talk about those dimensions because they often get overlooked, and we're seeing the results of what what it looks like when you overlook those issues for centuries.
Yeah, the ongoing struggles of humanity still to this day.
Right.
Is there anything you'd like to share with future generations, Jack, before we go?
Oh man, so much. But yeah, I mean, I would just encourage people, I think, to look at the music that they're listening to as a kind of that they enjoy, and that they immerse themselves in, like Black Sabbath. Like if you're a Black Sabbath fan and that's what you do, that it's a kind of holiness, and to think about that holiness and what it means to you, and consider those questions of meaning, you know, and see what happens when you actually like um dig into the lyrics of your favorite bands and start, you know, like having conversations with them, because it's a really enriching, it's been for me a very enriching experience and never gets old.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.